Chris, let's welcome Mr.
Mike.
Tim Brady to the show. How are you, good sir?
Welcome.
Welcome.
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're going to apologize to our audience in advance here. Sean had to pop out for a family thing, and so Chris and I will try to hold the fort down. I think we remember how to do these interviews.
It'll be all right.
So we want to bring Tim in. Tim, I believe this is our first nonfiction title that we've ever hosted on this episode.
Really?
Yeah. So all three of us, and you've got Chris and I today, we're huge fans of nonfiction, particularly historical, World War II, Civil War, that whole era. And so we're really excited to have you on today. Your latest book is Three Ordinary Girls, which they're anything but ordinary.
Yeah.
Can you give the audience kind of a 30,000-foot view of what this book is about?
It's a story of three young women from the Netherlands who got involved with the Dutch resistance during World War II. Two sisters, teenagers, when the Germans invaded the Netherlands in 1941. The older sister was 16. Freddie, the youngest sister, was 14. There was the third girl was a college student in Amsterdam at the start of the war. Her name was Connie Shaft, and they didn't know each other, though all three were from the city of Haarlem, which is about 20 kilometers west of Amsterdam. Itself a very old city in the Netherlands. Through the course of the war, they all hooked up with a resistance cell in Haarlem. And the sisters were raised in a communist family, and they were active in sort of resistance measures early on. Their mother was steered them in that direction. And they did things like they distributed party newspapers and flyers, and they housed refugees, Jewish and communist refugees from Germany early in the war. So they were involved from the get-go, but when they got hooked up with the resistance cell, and as the war progressed, they started to do much more dangerous, much more violent sorts of resistance. And through the course of the war, that took on the shape of sabotage, spying, blowing up railroad tracks, and ultimately they became assassins in the cause, which when I first heard about it, it just boggled my mind to think of these teenage girls going out with pistols in their overcoats. And as people who know the Netherlands know, the bicycles are ubiquitous, and they did much of their work pedaling around Haarlem and pulling their guns out of their pockets and shooting at them as they were riding double through the cobblestone streets of Haarlem.
And most of the time hitting their targets, which is, that's tough to do.
They did and they didn't.
And they did and they didn't, yeah. But there was always, they always did teams. They were always in teams, and so they had a first shooter and a second shooter. So
there was. They were pretty well planned out attacks. They by the end of the war they became much more adept at it, and much more proficient.
Yeah. As you already mentioned, it was two sisters and then a friend who came back. What are some of the key factors that you think propelled these three young women from normal Dutch life into, as you described, not cold-blooded, but maybe even cold-blooded assassins?
I think what all three were propelled by ideology at the start. They all had leftist inclination. So they were
Right.
they were they early on they disliked and disliked fascists and despised Nazis. So they were inclined towards a resistance of some sort from the very beginning. But it became as war does, it became personal, and they became, in their own minds and their own estimation, they were soldiers. They thought of themselves as soldiers in this cause, and that I think that allowed them to do what they wound up doing. Was, when I tried to understand what they were doing, I ultimately had to put it in the context of them being soldiers, and I thinking of soldiers of a similar age serving in the armies, the Allied and Axis armies. They doing what they were ordered to do, but in this case, the girls have the ideological boost to push them in that direction.
You could see in some of their targets where it could be seen as being personal. Some of the Dutch collaborators, and there was like no hesitation in what they were going to do to those men.
There was a bitterness that grew through the war. I mean, Haarlem was a city of about 100,000 at that time. It's about 150,000 now. But it was, and if you know that part of the Netherlands, you know that it's filled with all sorts of very small communities that sort of circle Amsterdam and circle Haarlem in North Holland. And these are very small communities. And when you get out into the countryside and get out into they're called polders, the farms that reclaimed land that serve for the tulip beds and what have you outside the country. It's really sort of it's a small insular sort of world, unique kind of world, and so that it was personal. They knew one another, and they knew who they were shooting, and they knew families of the people they were shooting and attacking. So it was harsh stuff.
Well, the amount of research you conducted, it's clearly evident throughout the book when we're reading it, and readers learn about the lives of the two sisters and Joe, Hannah. Was her real name Hannah, and she went by Joe?
It was her real name was Johanna.
Yeah.
And she became Connie during the course.
Yeah. So we learned about their lives, kind of before the Nazi occupation, and obviously during, and to a small degree afterwards. You get to see what happens. But while gathering all that information, was it difficult for you to remain distant from their reality, or did you develop some like emotional attachment to their lives?
Well, I'll be frank here. I don't speak Dutch. I didn't know their story prior to being sent an obituary for the youngest of the two sisters in 2018.
Right.
That was my introduction. That gave me, I think, a certain distance from the story, and that my problem was trying to draw closer to it. The language barrier was difficult, to be honest.
Yeah.
And to overcome that was took time and effort. So it wasn't. You talked about fiction writing. My background was in fiction writing, and one of my principal flaws as a fiction writer was getting too close to my subjects and sort of inhabiting their minds and my mind inhabiting them.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, and kind of going into a bit of a rabbit hole process. So it was,
But
Right.
I mean,
go
that's
ahead.
funny because it's not funny, but this reads like a thriller. Like it reads
Right.
like if I didn't know that this was nonfiction, I'd be like, man, this is pretty good. This is a pretty good thriller. But it's, these are real people, real lives, and this this stuff actually really happened.
Right.
That's the sort of nonfiction I like to read. I like to read fiction that reads with pace. I don't write history that is academic or scholarly.
Right.
Yeah, it can be too boring and dull, and that doesn't engage the reader. It doesn't help with learning because we learn as we read this stuff, and
Right.
and if you're just too bored out of it, you're not gonna retain any the message or the information.
I like stories. I like to tell stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're looking at 80 some odd years now since World War II. And so the detail in your research is very evident. But, during the Reconstruction, during the time, I mean, a lot of information was lost, and there weren't computers, and there weren't, these massive, disk farms anywhere to keep all this information available to anybody looking into it. So what lengths did you have to go into coming up with enough material, which is throughout this entire novel?
I was very fortunate, and I want to take my hat off right now to some of the material that I used. The memoir of Truth, the older sister, was invaluable in giving them. And I always, in my writing, I always look for that sort of first-person account that I can hang my stories on, and her accounts supplied that for her and her sister. And then there was a book that was done by a Dutch journalist in the 1970s, and he had the advantage that he collected. It was a biography of Connie Shaft, and he had the advantage at that time of interviewing many of her contemporaries, many people who worked with her and knew her from her younger days. And so I used that as well.
Well, Tim, let me ask you: were those books were they published in the United States or in England? I mean, were they translated or were they in?
That was a difficulty. No, the memoir was published in the Netherlands, and it had been translated in the late 90s, but the number of copies in this country were just, I had to, I used the World Cat Library System, which
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a compendium of all the university libraries in the country, and maybe I guess the world, thus its name. But the only copy, there were 3 copies in the U.S. university system that I saw. I had the closest one to me here in St. Paul, Minnesota, was at the University of Pittsburgh. So I had to go to the University of Pittsburgh and order a copy of the book, and then I had to Xerox the book. So I had it.
Oh my gosh!
The Connie Shaft biography that I mentioned is not translated into English. So what I did with that was I was able to get my hands on a copy through a bookstore in the Netherlands, and I had to use Google Translate.
Wow.
Page by page to.
How many pages is that, Tim?
It's about 200.
That's old school, man. Where's the microfiche?
Old school. It was old school, and if you've ever worked with Google Translate, you're not looking at a clean copy.
No.
But I actually found that, I think for my writing purposes, a little helpful in the long run, because it was like I could I could get the content of the story through
Right.
that translation, and then I felt free to sort of interpret it my way, so I wasn't hearing the voice of the translator.
Well, if we go back to the resistance, that's, you know, it's the heavy part of the story. The Dutch monarchy pretty much abandoned the Netherlands fairly quickly after the Nazi invasion, and I found it interesting. They didn't have too much of a role in leading any of the resistance until much later in the war, when it was kind of evident that, you know, the Allies were going to be coming through. How different do you think the resistance would have been had it had been controlled early on by the monarchy? And do you think they would, if they had been in control, do you think they would have still employed young women as would-be assassins?
Well, I think that the decision to use young women was extraneous to the monarchy. I think that the monarchy, to answer your first question, monarchy really didn't have a means to be involved in the resistance. I mean, when they fled the country, they and the government and parts of the Dutch army were essentially out of the picture. They couldn't get back in the picture until the Allies allowed them
the
access to. It was just too difficult to have a day-to-day sort of hands-on approach to the resistance, connecting to the resistance. The second question, the girls got involved in the resistance because of the fact that, in part because they were who they were, because they were. I mean, the resistance was looking for a means to freely go around and look at what was happening.
Sit in the shop with the makeup on and look the part and then lure the German to that you know, the property behind the house,
like a web.
It was that's what they did. I mean, that was the intent from the start. They were approached by this guy named Franz Wanderweer, and he was the central head of the organizer of the resistance, and his intent all along was to have these girls serve as his eyes and ears.
Right.
You know what I found amazing though is he puts them through a test. Like there's a test before, and there was no hesitation.
Right. I mean,
like
that was cold.
She went up and was like, and click.
They were tough girls.
Yeah, no kidding.
They were
an understatement.
They were. That was. You get that impression quickly reading Truce's memoir that she was sort of a no nonsense young woman.
Right.
Her sister was less that.
Well, she was 14, right? 14, 15. Come on, man. My kids are almost that age. It's scary.
Exactly. I was interested because when you think about resistance and you think about a foreign invader into your country, I mean, it seems like everybody's going to jump up and raise their hand and say, I'm going to be part of the resistance, but that's really not true. No. And that you look at the resistance was a very small minority of the general population at the time. And some were sympathizers, with the Nazi party. And then some were just ambivalent and they just hid into a corner and just kind of, didn't choose sides. So what is it about the people who, when you research this, what was it about the people who joined the resistance that was different than the rest of the population that chose not to?
be honest, I think that they're very special people.
Yeah.
The courage is, you have to, we have no idea, I think, when you talk about people imagining themselves joining a resistance movement in this country. I don't think we have any idea how all encompassing and all oppressive regime like the German Nazi regime coming into a country was. And it was just utterly brutal, and there were examples everywhere, and left and right, of their brutality, and to people who witnessed that, to still go out and take the chances they did is nothing short of astounding. I think there were executions aside from what they were doing to the Jewish population. It was, just a massive assault on sensibilities and humanity, just hauling tens of thousands of people who were one day on the streets of in the cities of the Netherlands, and just months later gone.
Yeah. Put on a train. Yeah.
And put on a train and sent east. And then every action that the resistance made was met with a counter reaction from the occupiers.
Right.
It didn't matter. Yeah, it didn't matter that they. I found that interesting. So the girls would go and assassinate somebody, or the resistance would go and assassinate somebody, and the Nazis were either too dumb to figure out exactly who was doing it, and they would just take a whole bunch of young men, and then they drive into the square and then line them up and then mow them down and then put them back into the truck, dead bodies, and then take them off to the beach, where they buried all those bodies. And it was kind of like, if I was a resistance member, I wondered in my own, as I was reading this, I was wondering, would that impassion me more, or would it make me be like, we can't be doing this? Like, what are we doing?
Well, I think they struggled with that very question too. I mean, and it's not as if the resistance was applauded across the board, and even those who couldn't bear the German presence in the Netherlands were not necessarily supporters of the resistance. When you were the subject of the oppression that followed a resistance action, you didn't. I mean, if you witnessed the resistance action, you closed your door and hid. Instead, what was coming was great. You knew it was going to be.
Well, you kind of have to go into survival mode, right? I mean, how do I survive through this? How does my family survive through this? Like, I don't know. It's just it's a crazy time. But in the beginning, that resistance was mostly made up, as we were talking before, about the communist groups. But near the end of the war, the Velsen group came to dominate that resistance and kind of dictate what was going to happen. And there was some bad blood and rumors between those groups. They felt like they were betrayed. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The early resistance it wasn't only communist, but the communists had some sort of organizational background, so it helped them to organize these cells more adeptly than people who were just coming to the resistance from everyday life. What happened ultimately was that there were a lot of different cells throughout the country, and it was, to be honest, it was probably, from the perspective of the Dutch government in exile, it was disorganized and chaotic,
fragmented.
no one knew what the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing.
Yeah.
So it was they wanted to put some organization on it. And what's difficult and so complex that I can't do it justice is that throughout the war, even as some elements of the resistance were doing the sorts of things that the girls were doing, there were other elements of the resistance who sort of towed the line between doing resistance work and doing work that for the occupying government.
Right.
They worked in civil service positions. Some of them worked as police officers.
Police officers, right.
And they maintained connections to the resistance as they were doing this. And when later in the war, after the invasion at Normandy, when the Dutch government got more involved in the resistance and trying to put some controls and organizations in the resistance. Yeah. They looked to these elements of the resistance to help them organize what was going on in the country itself. And
was it because they had more of they viewed those people as having more of a stake in the country and maybe more controllable, as opposed to, you know, like the sisters and their small groups of resistance fighters who really, it was kind of like, it was fragmented, and probably for a good reason. They were just doing their own thing. Like, this is what we're doing. This is our target.
Yeah, to some extent, but they were also people who were already in positions of authority. As I said, there were people who were in the civil service, people who were serving as police officers. So they already had some sort of control in the way the country was being managed going into the sort of it would ultimately be post-war era,
right?
But so they were there. They were a force, and they could be they could offer controls and guidance to the revolution.
So they were already looking past, I guess. They like the Reconstruction.
Yeah,
like
and they imagined themselves being the people who would govern the Netherlands and
right. Well, Chris already mentioned that. I mean, this reads like any top-notch thriller. I mean, from a fictional standpoint, the feelings that I got, and so it's obvious to me that this would make an unbelievable movie. But are we as a society so far removed from this period in our history now, from the years gone by, that it would be harder to make into a movie, given so few people that are even aware of or have, much less lived in that period of time?
It's a good question. I right now I'm wishing you guys were Hollywood producers.
We know a couple.
I know a guy
presenting those opinions and to the folks at Netflix.
We
would love to see it.
This would be a great home for Netflix. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But I really don't know the answer to that. I think that I think that a story that resonates is a story that resonates. And
true.
I think that if you find you push the right buttons, you can connect the past with the present, and you can make people understand, and you can make people see. So I don't despair that there isn't someone out there who couldn't turn my book or any good history book into a story that would feel
good. And this seems got like Netflix series written all over it with the characters involved.
We don't need to see a Transformers 10. You know, like we just like, I like that stuff, but we don't need to see 10 of them, right?
But 200 million a pop. Yeah.
It's super expensive too, right?
Yeah.
I tell people when we interview them, like I have my bookshelves behind me, right? So that it goes this way and this way, and I have my serious stuff over here and my sci-fi and fantasy stuff, my dirty geek stuff over here. But you can't see it's at a frame. But I have a history side, and it's Civil War, World War II, Greek. Like, I love that stuff. I read that stuff. So like when we got our hands on this, I was like, well, holy shit, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
We've never interviewed a nonfiction guy, but this is the guy we want to talk to.
Yeah.
Great.
But I guess if you were to talk to like any average American Joe out there about the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, specifically during World War II, most would mention, I would hope, like Anne Frank's diary, right?
Yeah.
Know that story.
Right.
But I doubt, prior to this book, anyone would mention these three teenage girls. In fact, I didn't really know about them. The three ordinary girls, with so many books written about World War II. And, I thought I've read like most of them, right? So many written about them. Why do you think this story has gone mostly untold here?
It's a very good question, and I tend to think it's in part because of the nature of what happened during the war. The fact that the Netherlands were bypassed by the Allies, except for the famous Market
Garden.
Yeah, Market Garden. Yeah, sure.
Which produced one great narrative.
Bridge Too Far. Awesome. Loved it.
It is an awesome book. But people, just as you say, before I started this, I knew Anne Frank, and I had heard vaguely of Corrie ten Boom. But that, I don't know if that name rings a bell.
No.
Earlier generation. She wrote a biography or memoir of her experiences during the war. She was one of the people who housed refugees.
Right.
And it was quite a popular bestseller back in probably the 50s or 60s. At any rate, those were the only two references I knew, and so it was all new to me as well. And I do think it was because there was no great liberating moment in the story of the Netherlands during the war, and there was in fact the Netherlands were, when they were finally liberated, it was by Canadian troops, and it wasn't until May 1945.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
There was a part in the book. It I don't know, it hit me like a ton of bricks. The people were out celebrating. They're like, yes, we're being liberated. And no, like your time hadn't come yet. And it wasn't going to come for a while longer.
Yeah.
And it was kind of deflating for the populace.
The famous day, and even today in the Netherlands, it's called Dolly Dinsdag, which means, I forget if it's a Tuesday or Wednesday, but it's a crazy Tuesday or crazy Wednesday. But it was so deflating. You have to imagine. I mean, if you're in the Netherlands and you know that Normandy has been invaded, and not just that it's been invaded, but in the succeeding couple of months, the Allies are making progress. And then there's the moment when the German troops are actually packing up and moving out of the Netherlands. And if you remember the Market Garden story, the German forces were moving from near Belgium up back towards Germany. That's why they were concentrated where they were when the Allies.
And then you get the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah.
But it was all. It looked like there was going to be liberation, and then there was this months about the the worst time in the whole war for the Dutch was during that final winter.
Right. Everybody wants to have a little payback at that moment there.
Yeah.
But when you were the World War II, I mean, if anyone looks deep enough, there are stories upon stories of amazing yet little known, instances where some tremendous heroism happened and some just truly amazing people sprang from all this grief. And when you were doing your research, did anything pop up in your mind and say, "Whoa," something you discovered and you thought, "Nah, if I had the time, this would make an amazing story in and of itself"?
That's a good question, because I do tend to look for those moments within moments that you can draw on. And I'm afraid I'm blanking right now on coming up with one of those examples.
Sure.
But it did happen. There were parts probably in the book where you're just like, man.
There are certain things you just think that deserves more of my attention.
Sure.
Well, how about the bridge where they're with that other group with the boys and they're going to go blow up that bridge? And
there was the problem, I think, with the individual actions undertaken by the Harlem Cell is that they didn't have the significance of a bigger story.
Right.
The grand scheme of everything.
They were individual actions that were heroic from the individual level of the characters that I was interested in, but from the aspect of a war, being a part of a war structure.
Yeah. Right.
I'll tell you one that just came to mind. That the girls did a lot of biking along the North Sea.
Right.
There is signs
to look at the sub installation.
Yeah.
Sub installations and also V2 installations.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
They were spying just at the height of the V2 scare that was the V2s were just about
huge.
Yeah, exactly. Terrorizing.
And I hadn't paid much attention to what specifically they were doing. It was just in general, they were biking up and down the coast, and I just imagined them these sort of gawking expeditions,
Yeah, sure.
And they're not 10 speeds, by the way. And they were biking for like miles to get up to the coast, like
steel frame, 6 gears,
sea winds,
Oh yeah,
right. Yeah. We were going into it, like pedal harder.
Believe me, I've been in those.
Yeah. But then anyway, they were doing this. They were not. These were not trained spies by any means.
No.
Right.
I just sort of imagined they didn't know what they were looking for. They were just being sent off on a scouting expedition.
Maybe that was their cover.
Well, it was to some extent, but the thing I found out after the fact, and I didn't include this book, but I did in the book, but I mentioned the city that they were directed to, and it was called Wagenaar, and it was near The Hague on the
right.
Oh, right.
And I came to find out after I had finished the book that was the city where the very first V2 rocket was
no
launched
kidding.
from.
Oh, wow.
And it hit London. It was,
wow.
September of,
Tim, was that also the city where, as I was just remembering the story, she was leading the group of children, and then they got on the boat?
A separate city.
Because I was just, as we were talking, I was remembering that particular scene where they opened up and they shot the boy and like all those kids end up dying, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And
with the exception of one.
One, and I wondered, you know, she's a young woman, you know, as just a young human being or human being in general, how that had to weigh on her consciousness. Like she was in charge of all of those children, and here she comes back and she's like,
they're gone.
Well, you know, there was one thing that both sisters died before I had a chance to speak to them. And but I have been told and subsequently learned that they both had post-traumatic stress.
yeah,
I can only imagine.
gosh,
you can understand that, and I subsequently found out that Yad Vashem, you know, in Israel, the Hall of Honor for those who aided Truce and Connie are honored there. And Truce's memorial, they tell the story of that. And to be frank, when I saw it in the memoirs, I thought, "Oh my God, this is awful." But the journalist in me said, "Well, you know, I ought to really check to see if this is not an exaggeration." It was subsequently confirmed by and they named the little girl who survived. She was a witness to this memorial.
It was just, that was an unbelievable passage in reading that. But I want to talk about a couple other unbelievable passages. We talked about them just briefly before. The drive-by shootings, the assassinations via bicycles. Amazing. And I found I had to reread those passages several times because I was envisioning it and I was like, no, that can't be right. And then I'd go back and be like, yep, that was exactly what happened. It's pretty amazing. What were your thoughts when you were writing those scenes? Were you like,
it was kind of similar. You know, when I first learned of them, I thought the thing again, when I first hear these things, I innate skepticism kind of takes over.
Of course.
No, this is just too wild to really be true.
It's a wild, wild west, but on bicycles, no horses. It's crazy.
You know, there were little things that it confirmed it in my mind. Like after learning about the drive-bys, I subsequently learned, and this was not from Truce in her story, but from someone who was quoted in the Connie Shaft book as describing Connie and Jan Bonikoff, her would-be boyfriend, going out in the dunes and practicing shooting as they're riding double. That, you know, that was the sort of detail that just sort of confirmed in my mind that they actually did this. And I will also add, going over to the Netherlands and seeing how adept people
bicycle
were.
riding, it's crazy.
You know, you would step out of the street and you'd see a family of four somehow on a single bike.
I know, right?
I read a statistic, Tim, that in the Netherlands there are no less than 37,000 kilometers of bike trails.
I believe it.
And that is a small country.
I was almost killed on several.
But Mike and I were talking before you came on. There was that one scene where it's like a failed assassination attempt. Like I think they do hit the guy, but it's a failed, and she gets shot. I forget which if it's one of the sisters or Joe, and he scoops her up, right?
Yeah.
And puts her into the basket of the bicycle. And Mike and I are like, they were not big people back then. No one was obese.
Yeah. And you know, again, it was one of those circumstances. After witnessing the talented bicyclists in Haarlem, Amsterdam, my doubts started to go down. Yeah, they can do that.
It's pretty amazing stuff.
Wow.
Pretty amazing.
Well, Tim, you have survived the portion of interview, which is a achievement in and of itself. There's
You get a
usually
badge for that. You get a badge.
We're now going to enter into what's called the lightning round, and we'll see if Tim has prepared himself properly. This is a few questions from Chris and I.
I'm going to prepare myself right now, Mike.
Yeah, and hopefully we won't ruin his career in the process here. So since I am the host for today's episode, I'm going to go first. And my number one question is it's a setup. You've discovered a portal that will transport you back to Holland during the resistance period in World War II, depicted in your book. But it's only good for 24 hours. So with that in mind, what single scene from Three Ordinary Girls would you want to go back and be a witness to?
Oh, dude, that's cool.
That's a very good question. I think I'm going to steer clear of the violence and go towards the interaction. So I want to be a witness to the moment where the girls are recruited by the head of this Harlem resistance, Franz Vanderbilt.
Right.
He visits and asks them initially, do you think you're capable of shooting someone?
Yeah.
And I want to see the look on their faces.
That's a pretty good answer. I might have to pick that one for myself. All right, number 2.
I liked it.
Of all the Dutch resistance fighters that you became aware of through your research, who do you think offered the most important service to the country itself?
Oh, I just blanked on his name. There was he only makes a quick appearance in the book, but there was a guy named, I think it's Walraven von Hall, who was really an unsung hero. And here's a figure that deserves some wider attention. He was a banker from a well-established family in Amsterdam, and he created a system that essentially financed the resistance for the entire country. And I can't give you the details of it.
Sure.
It was a very clever way of doing so, and he did it through most of the war, and was ultimately caught up.
Yeah, he was caught up. Was he sent? Was he sent to one of the concentration camps, or was he just killed outright? I forget.
Ah,
brutal.
All right. So we know that Joe had a name that she operated under that you referenced throughout. But what would Tim Brady's nom de guerre be in the resistance?
Oh, God.
Mike Houts.
The obvious one. I don't know.
Tom Brady? I don't know.
Yeah, Tom Brady, the football guy.
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe we can run a contest to see what comes.
Yeah,
yeah.
I like Tom Brady. I think.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's go with that.
All right. Sounds good. You guys look alike anyway, so
a little bit. All right. So several years ago, you published His Father's Son: The Life of General Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes.
What was one amazing fact you uncovered about him that most people did not know or have not known?
That he shot and killed a panda.
Panda?
He did?
Yes, he did.
Panda now there goes the hate mail.
Yeah, I know. I should probably be careful. One of the reasons I didn't often tell this story was I thought it would be.
Where did that happen?
San Juan Hills.
New York City Zoo.
Szechuan. I forget where the part of China were.
So it was in China. That's
in China. The panda. Maybe I should have put it this way. The panda that Ted Roosevelt Jr. killed still resides at the Natural History Zoo in Chicago.
No kidding. Oh.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It occurs to me now, this is to not make Ted sound like such a brutal. He
was a bit of a warmonger,
though. A lot of history about the pandas and why it was. He was one of the first Westerners to actually see a panda. He and his brother went on an expedition.
His life story is fascinating. It's really cool. There was one picture several months ago I posted on Instagram of him with Patton, and the footnote of him having come on during D-Day was the only general to lead his troops onto the beach, which was pretty cool. Pretty cool story. And just that family in general is just ridiculous. It's an amazing family. All right, so let's talk about Dutch for the last two questions. We're going to talk about the Dutch. True or false? The Dutch are the tallest people in the world.
Do you know the answer to this question?
Of course.
I'm going to say the Danish are taller than the Dutch.
The Dutch are the tallest people in the world.
Are they?
No kidding. It must probably got Viking blood, huh?
Yeah,
maybe.
It doesn't surprise me because the reason I get Danish is because I had a Danish friend who came from the line of Danish sea captains, and they were all giants.
Yeah.
Not us Southern European folk. We're very short.
Yeah.
All right. My last question and your last question. How much of the Netherlands is below sea level? A quarter, a half, or a third?
I'm going to say half.
Almost. It's just about a third. A third of the Netherlands is below sea level.
Wow.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So you get a history lesson and a geography lesson.
Have you guys been there?
No. I will tell you, I have a hard time pronouncing some of the words of the towns and like even the names too. And I'm just like, I know I'm not saying this right in my head, but I'm going with it.
My wife's been there, but I haven't. So.
As far as pronouncing things, you and me both.
Yeah.
It was so easy task for me.
It doesn't help. I'm from Jersey. So
still,
it doesn't even help in the United States that he's from Jersey.
No.
Well, Tim, it was wonderful talking to you,
dude.
Folks, Three Ordinary Girls. We talk a lot of fiction on this show, but if you want to read something different, but it still gets your blood pumping, Three Ordinary Girls, because it's true, adds a whole nother level of nervous tension in the writing that normally I don't think you could achieve from a fiction standpoint, because these girls lived this life. And so anyone with a daughter would probably just, have a heart attack thinking about what some of these gals went through and what they accomplished. So Tim, thanks for coming on and sharing your story with us. I really
loved it.
Enjoyed this book. So
I love this story.
Really enjoyed our talk, you guys. And I wasn't, even the question, the stump round at the end was survivable.
Dude,
we just grew his writing career. So Tim, good to have you on. Thanks so much, pal.
Cheers, buddy.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, hello, Christopher. We had Mr. Tim Brady on the episode. And
what's his name? Tom Brady?
It was Tom Brady in the lightning round, but we're going to go back to his original Christian name, Tim. Three Ordinary Girls. This read like a thriller times 5. I mean, to know that this was real happenings in the world back in World War II. If you wrote this as fiction, people would shake their head and say you jumped the shark. No. This really happened, folks. And so please go out and get yourself a copy.
Do it.
Chris and I both absolutely loved it. And Speaking of Chris,
What? There were bicycle drive-bys.
bicycle drive-bys.
Doesn't get any better than that.
You can't make it up, folks. Here's to Mr. Brady and 3 ordinary girls, and to you.
Cheers. We're a team. It's you and me. Where the hell is Sean? Sean Cameron. Dude, first of all, he writes this viral song, song that goes viral.
Right.
His brother sings the damn thing, and he's like, I'm taking a day off.
I know. Come on, dude.
What are you doing? You can take days off here. We work all the time.
I fixed it.
All right.
All right.
So you don't see me.
I don't see you. So now you're feel free to do your thing.
Right.
This is the outro for Tim Brady. And 3, I'm going to say non-ordinary girls, even though ordinary girls.
9.
Sean's not here, so it's up to Chris to screw me up, which it's usually you anyway, so
It is. It's
still in
always
good. We're still in good hands.
Okay.
And 3, 2, yeah.